on the screen.
You got water, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
How do I full screen this thing? Do you have any idea what these PCs?
Maybe view. Maybe I know I do Mac everything. Full screen.
Full screen.
Oh, that
A little
could be
bigger.
easy.
That's fine. It's plenty big. Avoid looking at these if you don't want to get a prequel. No, I'm just going to play it through a slideshow. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you.
Okay. I'll be sitting here.
Hi, everybody. Come on in, take a seat. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. And how are we good on our live streaming? I know that this event is going to be live streamed, and then it's also going to be recorded if you'd like to share it with anybody in the community thereafter as well. I also wanted to share that after the talk, there's going to be a short Q&A, and then we're going to open up these doors, and there'll be some refreshments outside if you're able to stay as well. So. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight, both here in person and online. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Janelle Iglesias. I'm an assistant professor in the studio area in the Department of Visual Arts. We want to start by acknowledging the land in which we're gathered on and in relation to today. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where the campus is located. The university is built on Kumeyaay land. The university is built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. I wanted to welcome everybody to the UCSD Visual Arts Department 2022 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence lecture tonight. Martha Longenecker-Roth was an artist who worked in ceramics and design, and she was a professor of art at San Diego State University and the founder of the Mingay Art Museum. She was committed to art for the many rather than the few, and to breaking down the barriers between fine arts, craft, and folk art. The Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence Endowment was established in 2016 to extend her legacy as an artist and as an educator. In the spirit of her historic impact on the visual arts in both local and global communities, this endowment to the Visual Arts Department enables us to annually bring to campus an artist of national and international stature with the aim of inspiring our students to broaden the scope, appeal, and range of their art practice, as well as inciting exchange with faculty, the campus community, and local arts and audiences. This endowment was made possible due to the generosity of our friend Anna Smythe, who's joining us online tonight, and the support of Christina Della Coletta, Dean of Arts and Humanities here at UCSD, both of whom we thank very much for this opportunity. Like anything, it takes a village of people to make anything happen, really. So I want to take this opportunity to thank a few people involved in the residency. We want to thank the other LAIR committee members, Monique, Anya, Elizabeth, and Amy for their contributions. A thanks to Ricardo Dominguez, our chair of the visual arts, to our amazing staff, Laura, Yulia, Nick, Paolo, Lucas, Kevin, and Justin, for all their support in making this event and all the things associated with the residency possible. And a special thanks to Ginger Donnell for all your coordination on the studio of Cannupa, Hanska Luger's studio manager, life partner, co-conspirator, bridge builder extraordinaire, and family for coming along and also making this possible as well. So today we're very pleased to welcome our 4th annual Longenecker Artist in Residence, Cannupa Hanska Luger. Cannupa arrived about 2 weeks ago with his family, and we are thrilled to have him share his work and talk about his practice today. I'm going to just read a short bio, and then we can really get started. So, come on in and take a seat if you're just arriving. Cannupa Hanska Luger is a multidisciplinary artist and an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes of the Fort Vessels, which is Mandan, Hidatsa, Beretara, and Lakota. Through monumental installations and social collaboration, Luger activates speculative fiction and communicates stories about 21st century indigeneity, combining cultural analysis with dedication and respect for the diverse materials, environments, and the communities that he engages. There are so many things I could say. I'm just going to list a couple in the most maybe recent 2 years and also offer my congratulations. Luger is a 2022 Guggenheim Fellow, recipient of the 2021 United States Artist Fellowship Award for Craft. He was also named a Grist 50 Fixer for 2021, which is a list which includes emerging leaders in climate, sustainability, and equity who are creating change across the nation. Just in 2020 alone, he was awarded a Creative Capital Fellowship, a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, Blade of Grass Artist Fellowship for Socially Engaged Art, and he was a recipient of the Center for Craft's inaugural Craft Research Fund Fellowship for 2020. The list goes on, but I'm going to stop there and just mention that the first time I encountered Cannupa's work was in 2016. It was the Mirror Shield Project, and I think a lot of us first encountered your work there. And it was a piece that went viral on social media and was shared widely. Was a tutorial video inviting people to participate and create mirrored shields for water protectors near Standing Rock that were leading actions in opposition to the North Dakota access pipeline. The online description for the project describes the intention as to create a reflective mirror not only for a shielded protection so that an oppressor may cause less harm, but to also utilize the oppressor's image to reflect their own oppressive violent force back to them, to remind them that we are all human, regardless of which side of the line we are on, to force the oppressor to see themselves and the harm they are causing. People from all over the world created and sent these shields to the water protectors, and the project has since been used in various resistant movements across the world and continues on and on. I've shown this project to all of my students that I've encountered since then. Almost like, of course, all my sculpture classes, especially when talking about social sculpture and about the social life of objects and the ways in which poetic actions can be political and political actions can be poetic. But mainly to emphasize, and to quote Cannupa, that art is a verb. We are so privileged and thrilled to have you creating art actively here with us, and thank you so much for sharing your work with us tonight. Please help me in welcoming you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dosha Maragua, Tishkag Nahudosha, Nitwe Hudosha, Cannupa Hanska Luger. I'm Awache, Dripping Earth Clan from Fort Berthold Reservation, so this is Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. On my dad's side, I'm Lakota. On both sides, I have some like European descent. There's some Germanic and Scandinavian blood in there. Basically, anybody who made it to North Dakota somehow made it into my gene pool. Didn't learn much about the Norwegians or the Germans growing up, but thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming still. You got it, no worries. So let's see here. What are my moves? Okay. Yeah, it's really exciting. It's nice to be here and being able to build, have a moment to meet some of the community. I'm going to be in 201. If my door's open, do not hesitate to come by and chop it up. That's totally good with me. But it's been pretty wild lately. There was a lot of busyness. One of the things that we tried to make happen, which I'm glad UCSD helped facilitate, was bringing my family along. So much of these residencies and projects and stuff like that were kind of built around this idea of the individual genius artist. And I'm like, man, we ain't ever done nothing alone ever, ever. And it's a lot easier for me to be focused and to be able to work if my family's near. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, so they're kind of at that exciting age where like every day there's something weird and new, and I'm grateful to be able to share my life with them and bring them here and do that sort of stuff. So that's rare and it's cool. And I think it's becoming more in vogue in the world, but it's appreciated. So I wanted to say that because in these first couple of pictures, this is actually my wife and I. Ginger is the other side of my practice. She is, am I projecting okay, or do I have to stand behind the podium? I'm projecting okay? She is my collaborator and sounding board, and I say if my studio is an island, she's like a seabird that can land on it and just absolutely ruin my day and make my work better. Like that's, there's always like there's a moment when she critiques me where I take it personally, but then I'm like, man, you know me the best, and if the idea I'm trying to put out there isn't understood by you, then it is not good. Like, I get it, I appreciate it. I gotta dive a little deeper. But she does the back end of my practice, so she handles all of the social media and emails. It's a full-time job. It's pretty wild. The needs of I don't know, what you need to succeed in these things is crazy. There's no way I could do all of that alone and have enough time to make anything worth talking about ever. So, but she's also really fun to. She's always down to do weird stuff. I'm like, I'm gonna make some superhero costumes based on future myths. I want to go out to White Sands, and we need to bring water to the desert and make tools for the slaying of monsters. Are you down? Absolutely. So this whole project was called New Myth. I'm just going to slide through some of the images from it. I built a bunch of severed monster parts and kind of laid them about the exhibition space. I was playing around with this. Who in here knows where the original quote comes from? What is it? The sum is greater than the whole of its parts, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's what it is. Are you familiar with this term or this idea? I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about like monster slaying. So I was drawing from like cultural context around monster slayers. They exist, they're archetypes, right? They exist in almost every single culture across the globe in development. And the Mandan stories I grew up with, hearing these stories. It's funny because like they're brutal, and I heard them when I was a kid, and we weren't allowed to like fall asleep. Like we didn't get like the stories my grandfather told me were not like, here's a bedtime story. They were dark and they were complicated, and you couldn't sleep. Like somebody would nudge you and wake you up and be like, no, you gotta listen to the whole thing. There's a moral at the end. Our Monster Slayer stories talked about these two figures, and their creation was brutal, and it made sense to me that they would be forced to combat monsters. They were kind of like built for it. In fact, it was a monster that murdered their mother, tore them out of her, and banished them to parts of the world. They had to find each other. It's a whole complicated story. But that idea of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I was like, maybe that works both ways. Like when you're combating these large kind of systemic problems, it's hard to like grapple the whole thing. But I'm like, what if you get some of its parts? What if you peel back just bits and pieces of it? So this whole exhibition around New Myth was about like, all right, well, here's some of its parts. Let's lay them out, And then, it's vague. There's like visual language tethered to the whole thing. And I think because it's archetypical, you can kind of build your own story around it. They were clay primarily. I do a lot of textile work. These were kind of first iterations of these monster slayers in this instance. They are combating a snake, and which is not a snake. It's made entirely out of byproducts of the hydrocarbon industry. And then the two figures are called the one who checks and the one who balances. The names of the kind of hero twins would change throughout their lives, which is pretty customary for my folks. So I was like, well, if we're going to imagine them in the 21st century, let's give them a new name. What's a name that everyone can equate, these kind of ideas? And I was like, well, we're dealing with capitalism. Let's call them checks and balances, because I like the idea of like what the words actually mean. So the one who checks and the one who balances. We're kind of this first iteration of wearable sculptures. Their primary design, these are like the first ones I ever made, and I designed them so you couldn't see or hear anything when you wear this regalia. So you were forced to wear them. Their design was primarily to go to Superfund sites or mining sites. I live in the Southwest in New Mexico, all through like Navajo Nation, all throughout the Southwest, Arizona. There's tons of like mining sites and different extractive zones. So I would take these figures to those places. I'd always have to work with somebody, which was always kind of fun. It varied. It wasn't always my wife. She was like, no, these hurt my head to wear. But we would put them on, and you can't see anything, and you can't really hear or talk, like communicate. It's a ceramic helmet, so it like kind of bounces back on you. And the idea was, if we could make a performance on the land to apologize for the human-shaped things. And that performance would be choreographed by the landscape itself, because we were going to remove all of our sensory array on how to navigate space and actually have to like feel your way through the environment as you move. It's not a beautiful dance, but it's an honest dance, and that was kind of why and how I designed these in the first place, was to navigate the land in that form. And a lot of my work ends up becoming like performances that I'll document and then share the documentation, but the actual performance is designed for the land. It's like, this is actually, you're the audience I want to engage with. I'll record it because this is how we receive information these days, and I'll run it through an editing process and present it as something slick and nice to look at. But there's always like a ritualistic kind of attempt to kind of address some of these things. This is another one of the pieces from the new myth. It's huge. They're big. They're like, that head is probably like about that big around. So they're not really huge. They could be bigger, but they were fun. Wool, ceramic, a variety of strange glazes and textiles. Once again, just like this idea of severed monsters. This one in particular was, it was called Corruption, and when I was building it, I was thinking about like microaggressions and the perpetuation of that constant kind of like little nibbling. So this whole piece has like all of these little ruts and divots all over the head. Let's see here. So there's a lot of installation in my work too. Okay, I'm pretty like material agnostic. Like I'm like, I like material. I'm really interested in challenging myself with like new materials. A big part of like all of this work that I just showed you are a part of this series called Future Ancestral Technology. And it's like a facet of my practice, but I'm exploring like, I don't know, indigenous futurism, science fiction, speculative fiction. All of these are kind of like westernized terms to express like what it means to maintain culture in general. I like playing around with it because time is a completely different, how time kind of like affects our everyday life is so like culturally specific. Like we think about it as being this like measured kind of embedded thing, but the way that we understand time or perceive time it affects the way that we kind of navigate space. From where I come from, time is not this linear thing where you're like at this point moving forward, learn from the past so you don't repeat it in the future. But I'm like, well, from my perspective, time always ripples and radiates in every direction from wherever you're at. And so playing with like science fiction or time travel or anything like that, I'm like, we're doing that all the time. We're drawing from information from our predecessors. If we're doing a good job, we're leaving a place for our future to exist in. You know, there's like these constant kind of nods back and forth throughout time. So I like playing around with this idea. But a part of this like world that I'm imagining or creating is I try to utilize all the trash of our present to like build cultural objects for the future. And so it's not enough for me to like say that's what this work looks like. I try to do it in my actual practice, which is kind of fun and challenging. Like it's like when if we have painters in here, or you can relate to this metaphor, but like starting a fresh, clean canvas is like way more difficult than like starting with like some sort of ground on it, you know, some sort of wash, some sort of thing that you can like draw inspiration from. The void is like kind of overwhelming. In sculpture and like installation, I feel like it's kind of the same way. So I like to have a challenge point or a task to like to adapt to. And so almost all of the material I use is secondhand, or at least second. It's like a secondary. It's like a byproduct of a different industrial process. So all of the wool that I use, everything you see kind of hung there, is it's wool felt, industrial wool felt. It's actually from a company in Germany called Filzfelds, and they make amazing wool felt for like industrial purposes. Beautiful colors. There's a company in Albuquerque that makes soundproofing for the horrible architecture of the 90s, as people are like trying to turn them into restaurants and little boutique stores. They're beautiful. They're just these big felted kind of wall dampening things, but their byproduct is like literal tons of strips of wool felt, you know, like 3 to 8 feet long, you know, the width of these rolls, or 4 to 8, I suppose. And it's just the rems that are cut off of it, and they give it away. So it's a free material. You just have to go down and haul it. What you see here is me dyeing it, because they used to come in like really amazing colors when this company first started. But since they got established and they were actually like making pieces for properties, it's all beige now. It's so annoying. It's like everything's beige. I'm like, oh, New Mexico. I like bright and loud colors, so I was like, well, let me try dyeing it. I know you can dye wool, so that's that process. And when I was doing it, this is like in my backyard in New Mexico, it looked like I was drying salmon. Like that's the only thing that I saw every time I would like step back. I'm like, oh, I wish that was salmon. But then the application was this piece. So this piece is called Unji Washlol Washichuta. And that's Lakota for the fat taker's world is upside down. So the idea was to build this like teepee and invert it in this museum space so that it was on the ceiling. And then I sewed it out of like Krenlin, this real mesh material. It was going to be made out of secondhand material from Nike, of all places. They had like, I was working with a company in Portland, Oregon called Portland Garment Factory. It's this amazing like woman-owned business that makes clothing and all sorts of stuff. But they work with artists, and they're a zero waste facility, and they pay everybody like actual thriving wages to do the labor. So I like working with them, and I hired them to make me a teepee out of rems from Nike, like whatever they had left over. And then their building burnt down. And that was like 2 weeks before this exhibition went up. So my teepee was in there, all of those materials were in there. And they were like, oh, we can send it back to you. And I'm like, you're going to get back on your feet. Like, hold on to it. I don't need it right away. But I got to sew a teepee. So I started sewing this teepee, and I ended up, the only material that I found that was light, that, because it needed to be light, obviously, because it's hanging from the ceiling, was Krenlin, which is like a tulle. It's like this mesh. It was so hard to sew, but it was so fun to build. Like after that whole 13-foot teepee, I just like used my teepee as a what are they, pattern pattern for it. And my teepee is like 13 feet tall. It weighs like probably 55 pounds, you know, just the canvas itself. That thing like weighs like, I don't even know if it's a pound, you know. It's so light and weird and airy, and it was like really fun, but it's also delicate, and I like the idea of like sewing it together and inverting it. Oh, and it was the only material that I could find in Santa Fe with like 2 weeks to build this, install this show, and I was like, oh, I was looking for like ripstop tent material or some sort of thing, and the only thing that I found with enough material of it was this crinoline, and I was like, why is there so much crinoline in Santa Fe? This is interesting. A part of that future ancestral technology is, this is what I call the rat rod, or the repurposed archaic technology. This is my van. It's like a working little van, but I keep it and keep like transforming it to be a part of exhibitions. I hate putting it in exhibitions, but I like how it looks. But because then I'm like, I'm out of vehicle, you know? I'm like, all right. This exhibition in particular was at Site Santa Fe during the pandemic, and I literally had like my entire, I don't know, go bag, you know, the like in case of apocalypse break glass. It was this exhibition for me, and then it was inside of this museum when I was like, oh, it might be time to break glass, you know, like, and I was like, look, if it gets real hairy, I'm just gonna be living in the museum. Like, I'm gonna break one of the windows. This is gonna be my new spot, just so you know. I got enough of my stuff in here. But we had to like drain it of fluids, and the paint job is all done with clay, which was really fun. It's just unfired slips. There's like that ochre, that yellow ochre, it was dug from around New Mexico, just on like a hill bank. And we slurried it up. It had a really beautiful yellow to it. And then the white was just like some store-bought white earthenware slip. But it was fun to paint it. The rims are like saucer sleds. It was like, I don't know, I love all of the illusion, not illusion. And then this material that I wove the basket over the top, I'd never come across it before. I went to this wood shop that I like going to, and I was getting like straight grain fir cut into 1-inch strips, and I was going to steam it and make this whole kind of structure, you know, by steaming and bending wood. And they were like, have you heard of bendy ply? I'm like, no. I was like, I've accidentally bent ply by like leaving it leaning up against the house. But they were like, yeah, check this stuff out. And so we ended up getting it, and that was a remarkable, fun material. I was like, oh, if anybody's ever got to work with bendy ply, you know what I'm saying. If you haven't, give it a shot. It's super weird. It's pretty fun. It's like, it's mind-boggling how flexible it is. Like, even just trying to get it onto the table saw is like, it was like trying to put pants on my young kid, you know? It's like, get rigid or something. This isn't working. But it was fun. Like, it was super flexible. I was able to weave it. And then the whole interior was all kind of tricked out. Also these like teepees. This is my actual teepee. This is the one that weighs like 50 pounds or something like that. And then there's also these telescoping poles in the background. These are like, the challenge was I needed to make a teepee that could fit in a Nissan Sentra. The teepee was designed to be like a nomadic structure. Like, you had to be able to move it around. You could build your travois out of the poles and haul material with it. Like, today, you need to have like a truck with a lumber rack to haul a teepee because the poles are so long, and I'm like, this isn't, we don't all live like this, you know? Most of us have Sentras, most of us have Civics, you know? How could I build a teepee that would fit in one of those? And so I designed these poles that telescope, and they all slide into each other. And so that's what's in the back corner. And that was kind of like the first dive into like, all right, let's look at ancestral technology, let's move it through new materials, and let's take what's important about it, the idea, and advance it through these materials, which is probably where there is this like idea of science fiction. It's really just like having access to material science and allowing your culture not to be a part of a historical context. You know, growing up, most of the time, anytime I would talk about or be a part of Native American conversation outside of my community, it was in the context of some sort of like historical aspect. And so this like ancientness did not allow material science and our technology to adapt to it. And so I'm like, well, let me play around with a few ideas. I mean, the canvas like teepee is a material shift, you know? So I was like, all right, well, I want to make it out of like ripstop material. I want to make it lighter. I want to make it faster, you know, easier to travel. There's always like tons of artifacts as well as a part of that. All of these things are also like handled, like literally made for your hand. And then I'll exhibit it in those kind of like anthropological settings with this reaffirming kind of idea that like, they're not art. They actually have a purpose, and because they're here, we can't apply that purpose. You know, so it's like a conversation around antiquities and tools and utensils and relatives. You know, living culture versus like sequestered culture, exhibited in glass and inaccessible. So that one was called Artifact. I'm just gonna like cruise through these. I loved actually talking with people rather than at people. So if you're getting any questions or anything pops up and you want to blurt out, please do so. Because I'm just gonna kind of like jump through here and navigate it. This one was called Wasted. This was looking at a lot of indigenous, or you know, they were like stereotypical native imagery used for corporate logos. And so whenever the mascot story comes up, there's always this conversation around, well, it's an honor. We're like trying to honor you, you know. You should be honored. It's an honor to be a warrior. That's so cool. It's usually to sell something, you know. And then whatever it is that they're selling, once it's used, the vessel that it's like traveled in gets thrown away. And I'm like, well, that sounds way too on the nose, you know. Like I get that joke. We've heard that joke before. So I wanted to play around with this, and this whole piece was called Wasted. It was actually when I was in my undergrad, I had like an art collective. I lived in a warehouse that I couldn't afford, and I was like, yo, homies, we should put on shows and kick down some cash and help me like pay rent. We started calling it Humble, which was also an acronym for Help Us Make Bail Less Expensive, which was also a problem that we had. But we would put on shows, music venues. This is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. At the time that I was in my undergrad, Santa Fe, it has like an illusion of itself. It's like a retiree holiday, and it's like Disney's version of the Southwest. You know, you're like, so beautiful and perfect. Even the Taco Bell has Adobe, you know. Everything's got green chili. Nothing can be higher than the Spanish colonial church. Like, you know, there's all sorts of, everything has to be earth toned. There's like all these HOA kind of things around maintaining the fantasy of Santa Fe. So like, they did not have any room for young people in their community. And anytime anybody would put together a collective or try to put together music shows, the fire department would roll up. Like every single time. If you promoted it, if you made a flyer or if you put it out on like the weekly rag, the fire department would show up and shut you down and like evict you. You know, you'd be like, oh, that's fire code. Here's the penalty. It's real steep. Sorry, you're gonna have to move. So we started doing all these like underground, like never promote it, just tell people. But it was a lot of fun. We ended up getting like musicians traveling from Albuquerque to somewhere in Texas or the other way, you know. Usually have to pass through Santa Fe, and we're like, here's another night. It's like a low paid gig, but we got a space you can stay in. It's pretty fun if you want to. And so we would book a show like every month, and then we would collectively paint on top of each other's work. It was like how you see vultures eating carrion, you know? We're like, put a canvas out and like literally paint on top of people's work if it wasn't that good. And so it was like an incentive to get better. It was like playing poker. You know, you're like, oh, I want to ante up, so I got to get better because they keep painting over my stuff. That was my favorite part. So humble was the space. This piece was like, after every one of those shows, we had this old upright piano sitting in the studio, and that's what the top of the piano looked like every single time. Like the next day, I lived there, so I had to clean it. Like that was the side part of getting my rent paid, is I was the one with the big push broom, like sweeping up cigarette butts and beer cans and stuff. But the top of it looked like this, and the aesthetic of it was always really interesting to me. It was like the party is over, you know, but there's remnants of it, this history of it. And so I was like, oh, I want to do that with like ceramic bottles and cans. And my favorite thing are these cigarette butts. I am a smoker. It's a problem. I got to get on a handle on that. But these are all handmade ceramic. I didn't make a mold for them. So the thing that I love about them is there's no like monetary exchange that would justify the amount of work that I put into this little tiny cigarette butt that would be like sensible, you know? Especially at the time that I was doing this. This was back in like, what was this, I don't know if it says anywhere, 2017. I couldn't ask for prices that would justify the amount of labor that went into it. And I love that. It was like an act in futility. And I was like, oh, it's so good. I just 300 more, you know, just got to do 300 more. And then like mash them out and butt them out. And then like even the glazing, it was dumb, but I loved it. I loved it. And the cigars and random stuff. Let's see. This piece is in Berkeley right now. This was an exhibition called Undoing Time. I liked this idea. This one is called The Ruin of Dominion and Other Gods We Never Named. I was imagining this monument topple, you know? And I was like, man, like, sure, there's a lot of like shitty old white guys and we can smash those things, but it's not addressing the underlying problem, you know? And I was like, this notion of dominion, I'm like, that's the poison. That's the God we never even gave a name. And yet we worship it like crazy. So I was like, that's the God I want to topple. So I built this figure. I thought like a sword swallower. I was like, this is the symbol of dominion. I was like, if you can swallow swords, and I know it's a trick, but if you can swallow swords, like you have dominion over death, you know? And I was like, and if you have dominion over death, dominion over life makes sense, which would justify like the seizing of bodies, you know, the stealing of land, the idea of land ownership, like anything that created this idea of dominion. I was like, well, I want to build a sword swallower as my like archetypical shape. And then I want to topple him, but then I want his like the second sword he was going to swallow to like fall out, like his hand was still living. Like once it fell and broke, it just kind of like relaxed. So it was fun. It was fun to play around with that piece. It was like and it was also big. I had a residency in Montana, Archie Bray. They've got nice big kilns, and I don't usually work full big kiln style. Like I make little parts in the kiln that I can fit in my house, and then I stack them and use a bunch of different materials. So it was fun to do that. Actually, this next piece is a good example of like, this is what fits in my kiln. Like the head, the torso, the hips, the calves, and then the feet. Like I had to build this whole thing in sections and then use the steel rod to kind of like fill it all in. This piece is called We Have Agency. It was, I had to like do some research on like shibari knot binding. And the thing that I really liked about it was like primarily one string. And so as you can see here, this figure, it's hard to see in this image, but she's holding a knife and she's cutting the cord. And the cool thing about that binding technique is anywhere you cut it, the whole thing unravels because it's all one string. So she's suspended from the ceiling by these strings, but is also severing those lines. And I was just kind of playing around with like what it means to have perceived like things that limit us, like our dependence on oil, Like that's a made up dependence. Like we became dependent on it because we built so much structure around it. I was like, well, I'll use a plastic rope to like, black plastic rope to symbolize that. And if you sever it anywhere, you're gonna fall, but it's like probably better than that, you know? So those are like some of the little ideas. I got a lot of work, man. So these are like buffalo. I have a lot of work around buffalo. I actually just opened an exhibition before I came here in Amarillo that was all about buffalo. I'm from like North Dakota. I'm river people, but we weren't nomadic. We didn't follow the herds like the Lakota sides, the Mandan side. We actually have a ceremony that we still maintain to this day that's a buffalo calling ceremony. And there's something really beautiful about it. One, it like kind of works throughout. I mean, it totally works in really strange ways. On one hand, you understand that the people were attuned enough to understand that these herds are on migration, right? So they leave and they come back, and they leave and they come back. And then this ceremony was built to reinforce the power of the elders and the systems within the community for the younger generations. So it's like a generational ceremony where you get to learn how to sing these songs, do these dances, learn these stories, and bolster this relationship with more than human kinships. But it's also backed by classic empirical science, you know, good old patience and observation. You pay attention to them because you're dependent on them and you need them, and you have a relationship with them that's like greater than resource, but respect. So you follow them, you get it, you know. This is Buffalo Nation. It was like banned for about 100 years. My grandfather brought the ceremony back, and within that time, I mean, buffaloes were brought, bison were brought to like near extinction. We started doing the ceremony again in the early 80s, and like only a few years after that, our tribe got like a herd of buffalo to rebuild the buffalo population in North America. So it's like, okay, yeah, you can talk about it being like purely scientific, but then something like that happens, and you're like, it's also magical, you know? So like, take that into consideration. 100 years of not doing it, buffalo were wiped out. A couple years of doing it, and then they started coming back. I was like, oh, okay, I respect that. But yeah, so I've done a lot of work around bison, and this piece is called Belonging. It was an exploration into the removal of an apex species, and it's placed in a river, so it's like, this is damage done way upstream. And I always think about the like, oh, don't drink in the river. There could be something dead in it upstream, you know? I'm like, guaranteed. Like, this is not a could be. Yeah.
Just kind of thinking about outside of the physicalities of each of these locations, like specifying river or desert.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything more imperative or important about the actual location itself?
Yeah, so this one in particular was a project in New Mexico where I live around the disappearance of the like terrifying disappearance of species along the Rio Grande River Basin. So it was an exploration into all of these different species that were in jeopardy, and an examination, an artistic expression of like biological and ecological observations around the effect of species loss. You know, so it was like, oh yeah, climate, that's something, but like before climate, like the loss of species is going to affect us like directly and immediately much faster. So we're exploring that on a regional basis. So where I'm from, there's like a bark beetle. Like 80% of the pinon and juniper were eaten by this beetle, dude. You know, that was like exacerbated by drought. You know, so there's like all of these interwoven, entangled stories. And so as everybody was kind of exploring all of those, I was like, well, and also way upstream, buffalo were removed from the landscape. So what's the like cascading effect of removing an apexed species, and how does that trickle down throughout time, you know, and over time? And if we want to like fix and repair, how do we reestablish these like kind of more than human kinships to like celebrate our connectivity versus like, and even in something that is quote unquote absent from the landscape, you know? Is there a way to repair? Is there something else that could take its place? For me, I was like, is acknowledging it also a really great step to understand the like where we need to go, you know? So that one, yeah, this is in, it's a tributary to the Rio Grande called Nambe River. Yeah, so that's physically where this piece was. That was at dawn, photographed it at dawn. There's a video of it with a whole kind of narrative. Once again, like the documentation aspect. Digital media is like something that I fell into because I was just like, oh, this is how people communicate these days. So how many people are gonna see one of my sculptures? You know, as a sculptor, that's like a funny thing. I'm like, like 90% of my work is seen two-dimensionally. Like, you better start playing, you know? You better figure out how to make that work. Put together a PowerPoint that you don't even know what the next slide is. God damn it. But yeah, there's all sorts of different things. This is this piece is called Watecha. Watecha is like it's like your to-go bag from a Lakota kind of like feast or feed. Whenever you have like a ceremony or a gathering, usually it's customary to feed people, you know, and it's your honor too to like feed your community. But there's always these like, I don't know, people bring their Tupperwares from home, or they got like them like styrofoam clamshells that you can fill afterwards when like everyone's leaving. You're like, do not leave me with all of this food. Take some food home with you. And you're always trying to like give food. That that food that goes is called watecha. And so I wanted to, this is the first iteration. Let me pound this real quick. This is the first iteration of a whole series of like regalia and performances that I want to do around Scavenger and like scavenger energy. You know, I'm like, whatever like does not see anything as waste, but as possibility. I'm like, let's celebrate that. Let's make some regalia to that. So this one's the buzzard. I want to get some coyote magic in there. Probably some I don't know, rodent, a little possum. Some possum energy would be rad. And try to figure out, kind of playing around with those kind of aesthetics, but like reinforcing this idea of leftovers. Like, take it, use it. Make something good out of it, even if it's something nobody else wants. Like, figure out what its purpose is. Find your niche, you know, and then celebrate it. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot more. I was gonna put this thing on and just press play and let it loop through and talk to you all guys, and I got stuck operating it, and I don't know how to undo that. And so now I'm like talking about each image as it goes through. Who knows how to do just a play, and then I'll open up some Q&A and some like conversation. Does anybody know how to use a PC? Ha, nope. Oh shit. That's close enough. You get it. Are you helping me out? Thank you. Follow everybody. I just closed it. I know. See how bad I am? It's gone. I threw it in the trash. I clicked the wrong Chrome. It's okay. Q&A. We can navigate outside of that space. I think I just gave you a deep dive into like a whole bunch of work. So do you guys have any questions or comments? Some like good old statements? Tell me about you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of waste out there. There's a lot of secondhand materials. I'm curious about like how you select those. I mean, you touched on that a little
Yeah.
bit, but I'd love to hear more.
That's
How you
good.
connect to the-
I think I wanted to talk about that more too. I mean, I'm literally here at this residency, and I was like, Kevin, Lucas, you guys see any speakers laying around? And they're like bringing me like used speakers that are just like in the trash around here. And I'm like, perfect. So I'm gutting these like old speakers out right now. I like the idea, like, so all of the regalia that I build, it's the base structure of them is secondhand sporting equipment. So like, I'm like, what sport is this for? I don't even know. Baseball, shin pads. There's like some lacrosse like shoulder pads, some hockey gloves. It's like all over the place. But I literally just go to either thrift stores. I love, like, I still have a hunter-gatherer experience in the world. And, oh, perfect. Is there a way to just let it play through? Yay. Awesome. Like, I don't have to do that. Shit, yeah. Cool. All right, let's start all over. I'm Cannupa, Hanska, Luger. No, I like going to thrift stores. Oftentimes it's like, I go in there and just try to relax my gaze. You know, I'm like, that's not what it's for, but what could it be? You know? So you just kind of like go in and find the middle distance and like look for shapes. One of the materials I love using are these Afghans. I'm obsessed. It's probably. Oh yeah, oh yeah, like full OCD everywhere I go. I'm like, we got to hit the thrift stores before we leave. There's a good chance there's like 14 Afghans. I don't even buy like packing blankets to ship my, like move my work around anymore. I just get Afghans. And I'm like, wrap it in an Afghan, fold it up after you're done, and then figure out what to do with it, you know? The thing that I like about it is I like using them in like the customary way that we would use like buffalo hide, you know, deer hide. Except I can afford that material today. I can buy it from a place that processes it. But I did not hunt it. I did not process it. I don't know what kind of care went into that. I don't know if it's sacred. You know, it's like, I don't know what happened, how you got here and what went through the whole system of it to be a living deer eating food to now like on my studio. I have a pretty good idea of where these Afghans come from. You know, one, they're primarily a part of a gift economy, which I think is beautiful. Like the initial thing is shared. It's like I'm gonna work my ass off, and it's gonna keep me cognitively sharp, you know, just as like self-care. My grandmother was a quilter and was like sharp as a pin, you know, to her deathbed. Because she was constantly doing this, the math of putting it together, the dexterity of, like, it got to a point where she was like, Cannupa, can you thread these needles? You know, she's like, that's where I'm at. I can't thread the needle, but I'm gonna keep sewing. You know, I feel like that's the same story with the Afghan. So it exists in this realm of generosity and care and gift economy outside of the economies we have. And then I find them at thrift stores, and they're like, they're getting more expensive. I don't know what is going on. I think I've seen them as fashion. Like, I was like, oh shit, fashion got a hold of these Afghans. So now they're kind of getting swallowed up. But I started it, I suppose, too. I'm like, I get it. They're cool looking. But I like taking them and using them as we would have used a hide. And I was like, this is a material that I know I can vouch for its care, you know? Unlike the leather or whatever other material. And I'm like, how do I rebuild regalia out of that? So I take the pre-made Afghan, try to utilize as much of it as possible. So that's like a big part of my design influence is like next to no waste. You know, I'm like, if I cut something off, I cut it strategically so I can sew it back on somewhere else, and basically build the design out of like efficiency using the material so the material doesn't become waste. So Afghans, sporting goods equipment, I mean, these are hockey gloves covered in that felt. There's like some sort of sport, I don't know if it's like field hockey or what, but they make these amazing, they're just like goggles that don't have any glass and they just have like bars on them. I love them. I don't know what sport it is, but I keep finding them and I'm like, yes, score. You can get your eye poked with a finger, but a ball couldn't like take it out, you know? And that's like what I built a lot of that stuff out of. And then I think the the challenge of making something out of something else is like what I was saying with like having that ground on a blank canvas. You know, it's like, all right, I know I can make anything, but it's easier for me to make something out of something that already exists and like try to build a whole like way to work with it by its limitation, you know, where I'm like, oh, what a gift limitation is, you know. I'm also like a res kid from North Dakota, so I'm like, you give me a limitation, I'll give you something really cool. But stop, I don't need any more limitations. Yeah, so I think that there's all sorts of trash. We have so much waste. There's like so much, and I think just having like a fun kind of different way to approach it is, and like what else it could be. I think the hardest thing is seeing it for what it is, and rather than seeing what it could be. You know, and sometimes you have to take the trash and break it down to even more trash-like to understand its potential. You know, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier about the commodification of your work, like how do you justify labor, right? And in your practice using these materials, how do you confront like the limitations of commodifying, let's say, performances, and then dealing with the institutional spaces that may or may not, or conflicts with your practice as an indigeneity and dealing with these things.
Dude, the hip and hypocrisy. Yeah, no, it's true. It's a challenge. In fact, this is why I'm like, I'll tell you that it's ritualistic in its performance, but what I document is not the ritual. You know, it's just the echo of that. You know, commodification of culture. It's the museum in general is weird. It's super weird. And the art market. It's super weird. It's gross. And I'm like, I make a living off of it. And it's like, it nearly killed me. Like, in all honesty, I'm at the edge right now. Like, I know I'm smiling and everything, but I'm right on the edge. So let's look at the institution of a museum and the confrontation of the weirdness for indigenous people. And honestly, everybody, like, you all will agree, it's fucking weird. The model is built around preservation, right? Like, this is a preservation model. You've got like art handlers and cotton gloves and wall lubricant to straighten paintings, like all sorts of stuff, you know, all sorts of technology that goes into the delicate and careful work of preserving culture. You will not succeed. Like, that's not what culture is. Culture is not an object to be preserved. It's in flux. It's constantly changing. It's like, you know what culture is about and what we should be generating even at the like academic and institutional level? Maintenance. What if we had a maintenance model in our museums rather than a preservation model? You know, one, you wouldn't have our relatives sitting in basements. You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't have your own relatives sitting in basements. Like the exploration to understand a culture completely, it has to be dead. It has to be. If you're outside of that culture, that's the only way you'll know about it, is that you can read about it from the beginning to its end. And if it's not dead yet, and you're not a part of it, you are not an expert, like, period. Because it's growing, it changes constantly. So even the like most contemporary museum of art, contemporary art today, is showing work created about a year ago.
Being able to work in that scale and having actually, that is the conflict. You have that opportunity to work in that scale and to work with your art by using the institutional space as well.
Yeah.
So it works for you, but there are still,
Oh yeah, totally. No, I'm in it. I'm in it right now. I'm like, if you had bigger kilns, I'd be using them right now and be making bigger clay things. Yeah, it's fine. You got a great metal shop. My steel load just came in. But yeah, I agree, and I'll get to you. I promise. Whoa! Pay attention. I'll get to you. I promise. But I wanted to dive in on this conversation yet. It is insane and it is crazy making, you know. The amount of privilege that I have as an individual is like so far beyond what like 7-year-old me would have ever expected. And it came on subtle, and it came on with great sacrifice and effort, you know, in order to get to that position. And then simultaneously, like the more privilege I have, the less or the more difficult it is to say anything. You know, it's like my fear is that with more and more privilege, you lack the capacity to endure and transform, and so it gets like, it's like that's why there's mediocrity at the top, is because we live in like this white patriarchal systemic thing where I'm like, oh yeah, mediocrity will just go right to the absolute top because nobody's challenged in any sort of way, so it rises to this position. But you want to like profound experience, like talk to people who don't have that sort of power, you know? The adaptation to those limitations, like I was saying, is how culture is maintained, not preserved, but maintained. It's like adaptation. It's exploring the edge of all of those things. But yeah, where I'm at right now is, no, this is good. This is good. I'm gonna have to go home and talk about it to myself in the mirror. What are you doing? Which I do. Anyways, you didn't trigger it. I have this conversation with myself all the time. What was your question? What is dominion? Indeed. I almost don't want to tell you so that you never fall into it. Dominion is an idea of being able to control everything, that you have dominance over something. So like some root words that come from it, domestication. So like domesticated animals, domesticated plants. So we're talking about like corns and wheats. We're talking about chickens and pigs, dogs and cats. These are all, cats is on the edge, I don't know. But this idea of domestication means you take them from the wild and you make them tame to be subjugated to a hierarchical system of power. Whoever's at the top of it has dominion over everything. So it's a lie. It's a lie somebody told somebody a long time ago, and then we didn't get a better option. You know, we weren't challenged to question it. So question it, please. Please, because you're probably about the same age as my kids, and I know you guys are going to be in a whole world. You're 9, my boy's 10 and 8, so you're right in between the two.
I had like sort of similar interests, but my question is a little bit separate. I was really into one that we were just talking about language in general, the presentation, but also this idea of like the future myth, and you were like mentioning something at a really, I don't know, just the word artifact popped up in the presentation, and then like the definition of it, and so much of like the like, in my mind, the like problem, hold on. Like artifact in my mind, I'm curious about how artifact like plays into your work, because I feel like so much of like the idea of like sustaining something as an artifact is about like sterilization and surveillance and like control. And I'm wondering like in the future myth and in your work, like the role of the artifact, or like is it like a destabilization of like artifacts?
Yeah.
Like capital A artifact or something. And again, like I forgot what you were saying at this part, but it was like really like, weird lights in my head.
Some synesthesia. I put some nouns, I mean, I like defined it in these ways. So like an object made by a human being, typically an item of cultural historic interest, artifact. And then the other one, which I was like, I also like this artifact, which is something observed in a scientific investigation or experiment that is not naturally present, but occurs as a result of the preparative or investigative procedure, like an artifact in the machine, you know? I was like, yeah, it's the same. What do you mean? It's the same thing. like this idea of the object and the noun of the object usually is something that had purpose. And it's like, this isn't the thing. It's what it does. You know, it's its doing. It's not even what it does. It's its doing that should define it. So it becomes an artifact in both senses, taken out of the cultural context, you know, where it's like, boop. So now it's like, oh yeah. by investigation, you've removed it, and now it's weird. And but it's also labeled as like, you know, a handmade object by a cultural specific kind of thing. So I was always interested because they were like handles, and like so much of the things that are in museums are like, they're either like trash or they're like super sacred. And I'm like, whoa, and you're storing them right next to each other, you know, where you're like, and the whole thing is like, I'd give them back to you, but you don't know how to store them. And I'm like, yeah, yo, what's it doing with those old pair of shoes, you know? Have you fed it? Like, so it's complex and it's complicated. But I think about that. You know, that's the preservation model. You know, you put it in the right room. It doesn't matter what its proximity is, as long as it's in like a hermetically sealed box. You know, you did the best you could. You know, but it was like, well, you've only had it for like a couple hundred years, and it's like 4,000 years old. So who did a better job? You know, and the job was done through maintenance. Like it's not the same thing when you got it that it was when it was created. It changed because we fed it, we took care of it, you know, like those stories. So much of it is like the truth about the human experience, you know. We as soon as it's removed from it being like a part of a living, as soon as you take it out of flux, you know, it's like you got to sequester it in glass. All I can see are those like birds from Papua New Guinea like stuffed in a sock, these like beautiful birds of paradise, like showing up at the museum, like in that shape, you know. You're like, this bird is the most beautiful bird I ever saw. Check it out, you know, for the viewing pleasure of everybody else. It's in its dead form. I'm like, yeah, it's like everything. That's fucking weird. It's super weird. Yeah.
More on the polls that you had in your civic, and just like what's the it's basically like
Oh yeah.
honoring technology as it like goes from old to new, and like how do you like, especially thinking like you're using a new technology that goes through, you know, all the uses that could be used to like form this new technology as metal or plastics or whatever it is, like how do you still like honor the original like intention of what that object is?
Yeah, so the teepee is a really amazing thing. Like I've seen it in Etsy. I've seen it like for dogs, you know. But the original design, one, there's like, where I'm from, there's 13 poles on the interior of it. Each pole is a moon phase for a year. So it's the teepee's a calendar that you live in, you know. The door is shorter, so you have to prostrate yourself every time you enter and exit. So you have to like be humble, you know, which I think is really cool. It's also a nomadic vessel. So this idea of land ownership is like, you had to teach the native people that over the entire globe before, you know, you could have dominion over it. Like it's a weird idea. If you're a part of a system, that's one thing. But if you build this fence around yourself and you're like, this is mine, well, you've also just like removed yourself from that larger system, you know? The teepee is like, I mean, it's 2021, post-pandemic, fucking van life, you know? Like, there's so many things where people are like becoming nomadic again, you know? And I'm like, it's a good idea. Like, there's really good ways to do it. I wouldn't do it by yourself. I would try to build a whole community that you could live with and travel with. That might be cool for everyone's health. But the teepee itself, like, there's so many. It's also like a lens. So it's a reminder of the connection between like sky and earth. You know, the cosmos and the land itself. There's so many things entangled in the form of the teepee that gets lost in it as like a shape. You know, and it gets lost in it as like, not all native people lived in teepees, you know, and not only native people lived in teepees. Like there were, you know, there's this design, you see it all over the place, but it's this nomadic idea. And so I'm like, all right, whatever materials built the centra, I should be able to use to build a better teepee pole, you know, if these are the systems that are in play right now. The teepee pole might be the best design if we were living on horseback, you know, or even walking. Like, I don't know. I wasn't there, you know. I'm here. And where I am right now, the teepee pole, like, you need a specific vehicle to haul it around. And you'll find it, but like which comes first, you know? Like, do I have to get the truck because I have the teepee? Or now that I got the truck, do I get the teepee? You know, like, I'm like, well, what about all of us with Civics? You know? So that was kind of the exploration. And I designed a pair myself, made them out of like weird, like what I could find at the hardware store. They were terrible. They were terrible. But the design, the idea worked. You know, I was like, all right, I can get this to this telescope. This will work. And then I was like, the coolest thing to make them out of, obviously, would be carbon fiber. I'm like, let's make some carbon fiber teepee poles. That'll be some next level. And so I like called up a company that made them, and I was like, all right, so I need this. I need 13 of these poles, and this is the design. These are the specs. It's like $1,500, and I was like, sick. That seems legit. A pole, and I was like, no. No way. I can't. Not yet. Wait till I'm real famous. Or like have a friend, you know, who does carbon fiber and give me some lessons. So what I ended up finding were these aluminum. It's so funny. And there's like something that can happen with that too. I have probably about 35 like US flags that came with these poles. These poles were designed to be like flag poles that you put in your front yard. Yeah, yeah. And it was like, it was a foot, or no, it was 8 inches longer than my original design, but it was like the same thing. And it had like twist gear, and they're aluminum, and they're lightweight, and they're way more rigid than the original thing that I had. And I was like, transformation of the thing is also inventive, you know? Like how you use it counts. So I ended up buying a bunch of these like fucking flagpoles, and they all came with these like super cheap American flags too. And so now I've got this bag of American flags that I'm like, you're gonna be something. I don't even know what yet, other than a threat. You feel like a threat to me, but I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. Yeah. That's the sideways way to answer the question I wanted to answer. Did I touch on what you said? Yeah.
Thinking about Michael's question about technology and a lot of, let's say, mass-produced technologies, whether it's a smartphone, whether it's nylon fabric, whether it's a plastic bag, whatever it is, the traffic and the promise of like a better future.
Right.
And that's a promise that's never fulfilled.
Right.
What is the difference? Like what is the difference that a future ancestral technology has, you know, literally to the future? You know,
Yeah.
How is it different from, you know, the always unfulfilled?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if a fulfilled promise is really what we need. You know.
True,
Yeah. I think the idea of striving is important. You know, and suffering a little bit along the way. But the only thing I'm trying to do is like use our trash today. Like I'm imagining what it means to like stop manufacturing, stop producing the things, and actually use the things that we already made today in our future in different ways to like exhaust that extracted resource before we like dig, remove, or transform anything else. And the technology is not the materials, but the invitation to reconnect to a much larger system than being isolated. You know, I think we are, I mean, here in the United States, we are suffering from displacement, you know? You don't get to be white in America until you are removed from your cultural landscape, like the history of the place where your ancestors came from. Like, it just, that was the story of America. You didn't get to be white here until you were no longer Polish, Irish, you know, whatever else. You had to like sever those like bonds, you know? And I think that is a big form of the displacement, and I think that's also the trauma that is being reasserted to all of our new like kin coming from different parts of the globe. It's like, can't be American. You can't have a connection to place. You know, that's not how it works. So it's sad. I mean, what I think it is sad. And I'm like, how do we build a stronger bond and a stronger relationship to place? Like, what does it mean? Rather than having some place belong to you, what does it mean to belong to a place? You know, and how is those totally polar opposites? You know, the sense of self is weird. Like, we have these rugged individualistic myths that we tell in this country, and those stories are being perpetuated through emulation across the globe. You know, this like fucking weird bootstrapping, you know, lifting yourself up. It's impossible. It's not possible. The effect of believing in this myth, like, reasserts that there is no other potential. You know, that this is the only way. And it was like, this wasn't even the way. This was not how it was. Like, the first settlers to come here, I guarantee when they saw land and came ashore, they were fucking whipped. You know, just beaten. Like, that is not an easy voyage. Almost everybody, even the captain was probably a little green, you know what I'm saying? But like, everybody else on board, they were suffering. And I guarantee you the indigenous population, like, our highest form of wealth is not what we have, but what we can give. You know, so like this, like, oh, they treated us like gods. It's like, no, we treated you like a human being. And for some reason, that generosity was so fucking weird that you thought you were worshipped. You know, it's like, you weren't worshipped. You were just being fucking cared for. Like, enjoy. It could be like that every day, you know? So I'm really interested in what it means to like reestablish those connections and transform what it means to not be isolated. Like, we're so isolated. We think, we don't even know who we are as ourselves. Like, who are you? You know? It's like, I have these ideas, but then I gotta bump it up against like, what it is in social media, you know, like what's the closest celebrity I emulate? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is, who are the people I look up to? Who's the person I look up to? Who do I respect? Who do I hate? You're constantly exploring this like super personal thing around who you are, and it needs external validation, you know? That's weird, you know? It's like, you never see a rock like, wonder what the tree thinks, you know? I think, and we're also, once again, I mean, this is weird, some weird deep dive, but like, we're also not just us, you know? Like, we are legion. There's like so many different species living inside of each and every one of us that who you are is actually a lot of things, and they all have their own genetic code and autonomy, and you are a system, and you're a part of a system. We are all a part of a system. So like, what's true at that level is also true on a much larger level. And until our cultural systems emulate that like sense of connectivity, we're gonna always feel isolated. We're gonna always feel separate, and we're gonna harm each other trying to like explore that, you know? I don't know what the hell that question has to do with like the materials that I use, you know, and a promised future. But I think the technology that I'm exploring isn't necessarily in the materials that are used, but the, you know, most of technology as we understand it today is a mechanism. It's not the technology. Like, the technology is an idea, you know? And so the future ancestral technology is actually looking at the ideas of like this connective research into what it means to belong to place. And if I can figure out how to sell that as a product to people, you know, I mean, that's what I'm doing as an artist. But if that like sparks an interest in actually having a connective relationship, and if like over time, if this is taught, like, I'm a long con artist. Like, I don't get to benefit in my lifetime, but hopefully down the road, there is like a much beautiful future that I can imagine that I don't actually get to live in, you know? And in that space, I imagine a reconnection to a much larger network where we don't have to feel as lonely and scared and violent and harmful, that we can appreciate each other. And it's not a homogeny, that we can appreciate the complexity of where each and every one of us comes from and what we've gone through, not alone, but as a network of things like feeding back into the better understanding. And so I make sporting goods. Sporting good regalia. Fuck, I gotta go. Gotta think about some new ideas. Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious about your process and whether you ever do drawings beforehand or how you prepare or plan ideas, or you kind of make them as you go along.
I make it up as I go along. I usually work in multiples, so I won't make one thing at a time. I make a bunch of things at a time. So as I'm learning, I can apply what I learned on one to the next one and then feed it back on itself. I work with clay quite a bit, and it's such a slow process, which was really important for me. I started working with clay late, but it actually taught me how to be a better human being. It taught me like patience, and it fucking reduced expectation, like to near zero, you know, where I was like, I keep expecting things to be good, but they can only be a certain way to be good in my mind. And what I found was I wasn't appreciating the fucking myriad of ways it could be that I couldn't imagine. That was either how I imagined it or bad, you know? And I was like, if I remove expectation from my life, I'm actually generating so much possibility, you know? I'm like, oh, never would have done it that way. It's a good job. Like, I like it. So yeah, clay helps with that. I never sketch anything. It's usually just working with the material. But I love to sketch. So I'm like a natural drawer. I like to draw, but I hardly ever do it anymore. Yeah, super weird. Yeah.
Just kind of curious, do you find yourself outside of clay, do you find yourself working the same way? Like, do you give yourself that sort of generosity of allowing felt or the wool to kind of adapt the way you work? Or is it always like, you have a set pre?
I think that the material has some agency, you know? And I think maybe that's what clay also taught me was like, it's like so plastic and you can make it do anything. You can make it do anything clay wants to do. You know, that's what I've found. And you have to figure out what that means, you know? Like the clay will tell you, and each clay body will tell you a different story, like what it's capable of. The more you work with the variety of clay bodies, you can like be a little picky and choosy around what it is you want to accomplish. But I think material has a lot of agency in the creative process and in our lives. You know, whether it has a pulse or not, it's still made of the same stuff and it has qualities, you know, properties. I think the speed, like I like making all of this sort of stuff because it's so fast. Like felt, you know what I get to use with felt that I never get to use and I'm actually absolutely in love with? This is probably the one product that I am purchasing that's not like a repurposed material. Hot glue. Like, I love it. I was like, I had so much disdain for hot glue. I was like, ugh, hot glue. I'm like, look down my nose at it like I'm on some fucking level to look down my nose at hot glue. But with wool, it is an amazing bond. I was like, I would sew this wool, and I was like, yeah, that's how you put together a thing. And then I tried hot glue for a decorative part, and I could tear the seams, and I could not fucking tear that hot glue. It like pulled the wool. Like I had to rip the wool apart in the glue state. I was like, okay, hot glue's legit with wool. And so it was really fun to build that way because it was fast. But my clay practice is slab and paddle. So I roll out slabs and I hand build everything with these, you know, big slabs. And I was like, sheets of wool is kind of like slabs. You can't manipulate it as much, but like knowing how to cut it to get like wraps and forms and stuff like that, there was like, one thing always ends up informing the other as far as navigating, but it's like the speed at which you can do it, you know? Like I'm working with clay right now in the studio and I love it because I've been away from it for a little bit. And I tend to like destroy the first thing I make, like trying to remember how to work with the material after working with another one. You're like, oh yeah, sorry, I thought you were felt for a minute. Yeah.
Have you tried wet or needle felting?
No, I haven't. That's like we were actually felting a thing.
That's your ceramic opportunity with your wool.
Yeah. I live in New Mexico, so there's plenty of sheep. So like access to wool is there, you know, which is huge, you know. It's like, but I haven't ever tried it.
We'll teach
Okay, yeah, come on down. Give me a pointer. I've seen it, and I think it's cool, you know. And I know that like the wool I'm using is the thing that I like about it is it's industrial. It's like it's gone through that heavy systemic process that we have, and I'm like, so how do I explore that as like a byproduct material? You know, whereas like wool from sheep, like I can actually generate a holistic relationship with community members where I live that like transforms the like conversation I'm trying to have, you know, where I'm like, I'm actually living what I believe rather than trying to like address this like industrialization of our lives, you know. But I'd probably be super down with it.
Would wet and needle felting be able to integrate that wall rolling sheet with the
Oh, really? You can mix the two.
Yeah.
Come on down, 201. Usually there. Yeah.
I have a super cheesy question that I like to ask people because I teach the professional practices class for undergrad. And I always like to ask artists what kind of advice they would give their younger self about practice, but also I feel like specifically like maybe also what advice would you give your younger self with looking at all the experiences you've had now partnering with institutions and how tricky that can be.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think I already said it to my younger self at the time, and I would stay firm with it. Like, the success I've had is there are probably like two major contributions to it. One, never stop. Like that's the hard. It's like the easiest and the hardest one. Like, I went to school with better artists than me, and they stopped. You know, like that, and I got better. Like by not stopping, you get better and better and better. So like there is no genius, you know, unless we're talking about the true like Grecian one that comes in from on high and rides you like a pony, you know. That's the genius I think might actually exist. But like the individual person like with the spark and light, dogged practice will outshine genius every single time, you know. Over time, it will outshine it. So never stop is huge. The other thing that I did that I thought was extremely important and so contrary to what everything else told me was aim low and give it everything you got. Like, I swear, like they're always like, aim for the stars and perhaps you'll hit the moon, you know? It's like, no, you'll be disappointed with both. And that's what I found. If you're like aiming to have this like great achievement, like, you're not going to get it most of the time, you know? But if you aim low and celebrate every single victory and put everything into it, one, you build the endurance to actually like give it your all. Two, showing up is huge, you know? And being able to like, at any level, when you show up and you shine in a way, that actually like creates a capital that no monetary thing can exchange, which is like, this motherfucker shows up. You know, and that's huge. So aim low, get everything you got. What I found was like every little, and like aim as low as you need to, you know. I'm like, did you brush your teeth this morning? High five, you know, like whatever it is. But what I found is that stacking of victories far exceeds the like, like an everyday loss, you know, of not being where you think you should be. Like that general and continuous stacking, the things that I aimed for when I was in my undergrad are so far below me, and I didn't even recognize they're happening because I was gradually moving past it over and over and over again. And that far distant star, by the time I got to it, was like so normalized, you know, where you're just like, oh, no, we can be doing better. We could be doing better. One little step at a time, you know. So I would say the same thing to me like that. And then what was the other thing?
In terms of like partnering with institutions.
Oh, yeah. That was weird. So I was fortunate enough to work with a gallery like right out of my undergrad. And they didn't know what they were doing or what they were getting. And I got super grossed out by it, you know, just the absolute capitalist, market-driven consumer kind of scenario. And I was like, man, I want to have a conversation with people. I need to work at the institutional level. I need to work in museums so people can see the work rather than like work my ass off, put it in the gallery exhibition. It's like sold to somebody and sits on their, end table, and that's the end of the story. Like that's what it was in my head. But I think even working with the institutions, like it's also limited. Like I have the equal level of like weirdness, like weirded out by these larger systems as I was by the smaller system. But I think what helps me work and keep working and not like curl up like a spider and die is I do believe that art is a verb. And I believe that the systems and the businesses that I navigate celebrate it as a noun. It's about the object, it's about the thing. But the object that I make, I always feel like is a byproduct of something really beautiful and something really special that I cannot monetize, and that's the making. And the making makes me better, for the next time. So I'm like, if this object can live in this space and it can bring joy to one person or 15 people, that noun is doing a good job, But where the art exists is not in the thing, it's in the process. And that still lives with me, whether I'm working with a gallery or a museum or culture work in my own community or whatever. Like art, we are the greatest archive of human history and knowledge. Like each and every one of you. We're the dopest museum. We're the most complicated and sophisticated computer. We are the coolest like materials we could imagine. It's in us already, and we're generating that, and we're going to become that. And we won't have it until we understand it. We might get it before we understand it and hurt a bunch of people, but we're going to eventually figure it out. Through the process of being alive. So, yeah. Dollar bills, y'all.
So I think we're going to open up the doors for some refreshments. But I also just wanted to let everybody know there's going to be an open studio on Friday, October 14th from 12 to 2 at the main gallery at the VAP, where Cannupa will be sharing some work and maybe
Dang.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all.